Yeah. Bravo. So good morning. I'm with Gabe Lensis, expecting Lensis' daughter Esther any moment, and Harry in Chicago. Gabe's here in Los Angeles. Lensis is up in Monterey, and we're going to talk about the mental obsession and emotional sobriety and spiritual malady today. And one of the things I wanted to just mention as a precursor to this discussion is that emotional sobriety is about sobriety in general from any compulsion is becoming sane in relation to that compulsion, meaning that we're doing what it takes not to stop the compulsion, but not start the compulsion. The whole key to this discussion is about what we start and restart rather than what we should be stopping and not doing. If we're stopping it, not doing it, we've already started it. And that's the problem. If I'm trying to stop something, I keep starting. That becomes a very, very difficult, hopeless condition. So we're talking about what we're starting. If we can come to terms with what we're starting, meaning start to just open up to the experience we're creating and be honest about what we're actually doing, engaging with this, we can start to actually notice that these things that we've been doing that we thought were helping were actually hurting and maintaining and managing the problem. So the idea is that the idea about emotional sobriety is getting sane emotionally, meaning mentally. Because mentality, if we didn't have any mentality, we wouldn't have any emotions, we wouldn't make any decisions. There would be none of those things possible for us as humans. And there are people who are living that are in that condition, comas and other kind of catastrophic conditions that have kept people from being able to function. And yet their body continues to survive to the degree that they're able to live, even without that cognitive, that mental state. So that's sort of profound in our discussion because it points to the fact that there's something going on beyond the thinking. There's a knowingness that's happening beyond the thinking. So emotional sobriety is starting to actually look at the thing we call self, myself, yourself, ourselves. And historically, ego as a word is rooted in the idea of I, the fact that I am, the fact that you are, the fact that we are. That's the root of ego in actual Latin terms, the root of it. That's what it meant to begin with. How we use it today is in relation to a false image of self. Ego is always this thing we're trying to manage, trying to fix, trying to repair, trying to get over, trying to feel better about, talking about it as though it's real, as though it exists separate from us, rather than noticing that when we think about our thinking, we have ideas about things. So there's an old adage that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And I would suggest so is ugly. So we decide, we choose. If I look at a painting, or I look at a car, or I look at anything, I make a decision about that thing and decide whether or not I like it or don't like it, often. I'm giving that thing meaning. It doesn't have meaning on its own in that regard. I'm actually giving it my ideas in terms of meaning. So if I think that thing becomes what I think it means, because now I'm thinking of it only in terms of what I'm thinking, I'm not really thinking about the thing anymore, because the thing is the thing, whatever it is. If it's a painting, it's a combination of paint and canvas and a frame and mounted somewhere, and all those kind of things are what it's actually. But what I'm thinking about it now is what I'm thinking about it. Like if I think about you and I think you're good and you have these traits and I think that's all that you are is what I'm thinking. I'm not thinking about you. I'm actually thinking about my thoughts about you. And starting to notice that distinction can help put the pieces together to start noticing how we set in motion obsessive thinking, which gives us the impression that we're alone, disconnected, don't have a place, and feel as though we don't belong. So we're always looking for that place to get to, trying to find the things that would have us feel that fulfillment. But the basis of that thought, while it's maintained, is never going to find anything to fulfill it because it has no basis in reality. It's just a thought thinking about a thought. So if I am thinking about my thinking and thinking that becomes who I am because I think that that thinking is reality, and I think thus that it's true, I make believe that I am in fact now the creator of reality. I have become God effectively in that regard. So I am all powerful, all knowing, always present.
Yes.
And then thinking about everything only in the terms I think they are rather than how they are. So if you have,
that's good too, right?
If you have any attributes beyond what I'm thinking, I don't see them at all because now I think all you are is what I think. But worse than that, that's one example. Worse than that, I begin to think that all I am is what I think. And since that has no basis in reality, because I am not what I think, because I am the one choosing my thoughts, if I'm choosing my thoughts, I can't be my thoughts. So I am, and we are connected to a, let's say, capital self, the essence of life, the essence of essence, the essence of nature. If I am those things thinking I'm only the thinking I'm doing, I feel disconnected, not because I'm disconnected, but because I'm feeling the thought that's disconnected because it has no substance.
Yeah.
So the mental substance abuse, like chemical substance abuse, the mental substance abuse is thinking that there's substance when there's no substance, which would be a lie. And the basis of any mental deficiency, conflict, inner conflict, mental anguish, emotional turmoil, etc., is all coming out of this idea that my thoughts are reality and truth. And as a result, everything I think about everything is real and true. And it's the only thing that that thing is. So I've really disconnected my own potential to realize more, literally realize self-actualization and self-realization are actually realizing what's happening in real terms, not in the terms of my own reality, not in the terms of this distinct idea I have about my meaning and my thoughts and my positions and my decisions. It's about how things actually are and how would they actually be as they are, however they are. So if I can start noticing, good morning, Esther. Harry, this is Esther, Lence's daughter, and Gabe, Esther. So if I'm thinking about my thinking as being the source of reality and truth, I'm actually terrified of that thought because I feel as though I'm disconnected from the universe and I have no place and I don't belong anywhere. And I can't get enough to fulfill that because it has no basis in reality. So to think of insanity as reality is to miss the point of what insanity really is, which is not sane. It isn't reality. It's just an idea that we have about reality that we think is true that isn't true. It's a lie. So the basis of a lie is that it's always only the opposite of what it claims to be. If something is true, it claims to be false. If something is false, it claims to be true. So the one thing a lie can never be is what it claims to be. And to try to turn a lie into truth creates an impression of impossibility because what we're trying to do is impossible. And within the psychotic, literally obsessive thinking, we presume that life is difficult and life is hard and God hates us and the universe hates us and everyone in the world is difficult and hard to deal with. Not noticing that that viewpoint is coming from our own mentality. It's not coming from out there. It's a decision we're making about what we're surrounded by. So if it's insane, it really doesn't exist except to thoughts. So insanity occurs in the brains of humans. Now, some animals go crazy. Rabid dogs, rabid animals, animals that get sick can become very, very vicious. But they're actually dealing with a physical ailment that's causing that desperation. pushing them to those extremes of being vicious and violent and just, seemingly out of their minds. That's very different than creating the condition in our own thinking and then thinking that we have nothing to do with it. And as a result, there's nothing we can do about it. And as a result, we're condemned simply to continue to repeat it, which is exactly what addiction is. So addiction, ego, lies, they're all basically the same thing. Obsessive thinking, they're all basically the same thing. They're different versions, perversions of the same version of an idea that isn't true, thought of as true, or an idea that's true that's thought of as untrue. It's an attempt to reverse the natural order of life and think that that's even possible. Because in an infinite state of being, the backwards and the upside down is the same. It doesn't change it whatsoever because there is no dimension there. There is no space there. It's a dimension that's beyond space and time. It isn't even beyond it, it's also within it. So if it's within it, if it was outside of it, that would mean that everything that we had was exclusive to it, which would mean it wasn't infinite. But if it's infinite and it's within and without, because it would cover both bases, subjective and objective, then it's absolutely here with us as we speak, as we breathe, as we think, always. And it's stable. It doesn't rattle. It isn't unstable. It doesn't roll. It doesn't cause any of the disruptions because it's simple. If it doesn't change, that's as simple as you can get. So any of the disruptions we experience are coming out of the thinking we're doing about what's happening. Essence of this is that to start speaking and thinking in absolute, to start thinking in absolute terms allows a conversation in absolute terms. And one of the points is that starting to see that we are each absolutely responsible means that we are each 100% responsible for the experience and everyone else's experience simultaneously. And so too, then, that doesn't exclude us from everyone, that includes us with everyone. We're all 100% responsible. So you can't be 110, people say, oh, I'm 110% in. Well, that means they were only 90% in to begin with, and now they're going the whole 100. There's no 110%. It's either whole or it's not in this regard. It either exists or it doesn't. So I'm not telling you that it does because it isn't my words and my thoughts that you depend on primarily. It's your thoughts and your words as a result and your feelings, because your thoughts are going to drive your words, they're going to drive your feelings, and they're going to drive your actions. So if you're watching from a knowing source, you'll see that conscientiousness, being self-conscious, and by the way, that's defined as undue regard for appearance, meaning the self that we think is conscious has no real self, it has no basis, and we're afraid constantly of looking good to try to promote an image of self that doesn't exist, versus starting to see that the actual self is complete and whole and it can't be diminished. It can't be reduced. It can't be less than. It can't be more than. It just is, as we all are. And in thinking in those terms, it puts everybody on the same basis, which we are, if this is true. And again, I'm not telling you, I'm not asking you to believe or have faith. Just try these things on in your own experience. You'll have your own words that will go with them. They will not be my words. I talk about it because my sense is we haven't talked about this. As humans, we haven't talked about it in a way that it's been talked about by many, many different people in different ways. The idea of the addiction to thinking as a primary source of making believe that our thoughts are reality starts to diminish the impact of that obsessive thinking because it's not about not thinking anymore. It's just noticing that when I make believe my thoughts are true and real and all things are as what I think, I'm actually crossing into this very disturbing experience. I'm actually asking for that to happen. So hopelessness, if I continue to do that, if I insist on creating that and manifesting those feelings, and then I think that this problem is persistent, I'm again trying to disavow having anything to do with it, trying to say, I don't have anything to do with it. It's out there. It's happening to me. I'm a victim. I can't do anything about it. And as a result, I'm just going to continue doing the same desperate thing because that's all I can do is to try to feel better and try to get over it. It's the beginning and end, alpha and the omega. So talking about it gives us a chance to begin to look at it in honest terms. And this conversation is about focusing on that absolute nature rather than the stories that we have trying to explain why we aren't experiencing those things. Because if we're telling stories to justify why we're not experiencing those things, we're experiencing those things and thinking the story disqualifies our experience. Just another way of thinking about thinking in some new way that has it look better. That things aren't how they look, they aren't how they appear, they aren't how they seem, they are how they are, period. And so are we. We're exactly how we are right now, fully intact. If nature is natural, it's our nature, period. Now we can argue with it, we can doubt it, but the doubt we cause is the doubt we experience. It's not the world we're doubting. It's not the essence of life we're doubting. It's not the essence of essence we're doubting. It's our thinking we're doubting. And to start seeing that is to start to account for what we're doing and face the face we thought was too scary to face. And the thing that we were afraid of facing was the fact that we kept thinking we had to deny, refuse to accept what we were doing and look at it honestly. We were facing the fear created by doing that. And that fear that's created is trying to get our attention to say you're onto a path that's dangerous. It's risky. Going down that is putting you at risk. So that's a little prelude. And Esther, I'm glad to see you. Esther and Lensis and I had a meal up in Monterey on my way up to Oakland for my daughter's memorial. And we spent 2 hours, and she is 16 years old and a brilliant artist and has really, I guess she's been listening to this while Lensis was listening, and she's had some very, very interesting little growth spurts and awarenesses that were incredibly clear. I told her, I said, that you're actually speaking in terms that are more clear than most of the adults I know. So she doesn't have 30 years worth of baggage or whatever the time is. So welcome. So thoughts on this basis. I'm going to unmute everyone.
I am receiving, absorbing all the information because it's always is wow. Yes. Jack, when you mentioned alpha and omega, I like it. What if I say alpha?
Beginning and end.
Ooh.
So our human experience is subject. The subjective aspect of our experience is that we are subjects in that experience. So the subject of our subject is typically what we think about things.
Yeah.
In sobriety, if we're really being asked to go from pure subjectivity, everything is only what I think, to start to think, to see that at the end of those thoughts, objectivity begins, where I start realizing that things are also what everybody else thinks they are in terms of their thinking, but they're also what they are for all of us. They're also exactly, in one way, they're absolutely the same thing for all of us. And in this other subjective way, they're different according to how we think of them. So it doesn't change the thing. I mean, it may have an impact on those things. It may make a dent in them. Physicists have said that when we observe something, it has an effect on the thing we observe. So we may have the energy we bring may affect that thing. But I would say if we're seeing that thing from a corrupt standpoint and the effect we're having is corrupt, we're probably creating toxicity in that thing that's not going to be good for anybody. And human history is littered with experiences that would replicate that thought. Has been going on for a long time. As long as we have thought self-indignation, self-righteousness was indignant enough to suppress and oppress and kill people, for what they thought. It was never how they looked. It was always what they thought that was the real issue. And it tends to be the exact same conflict that we run into with other friends and people.
Yeah. That reminds me of something that I learned last year in world history. I was learning about how one of the ways that they would justify slavery and all the awful things that they did to the Black people was they didn't see them as human. Right. And then when we came to, like, when the colonists started colonizing America, and they had to, like, figure out their government and their democracy and everything, they would count the Black people, the slaves, as only three-thirds. No, not three-thirds. That would be
one third.
1/3 of a human.
3/5.
Right.
3/5, something like that.
I think that was the vote they gave them, but I think she's referring to the way they count. They thought of them as 1/3 human. Now, thinking somebody who's human is not human. That's actually inhumane.
Exactly.
Right. So wouldn't the treatment naturally follow that people would treat them inhumanely, thinking that the moral imperative there is correct?
Yeah.
So morality becomes immorality, and virtue becomes a lack of virtue, and love becomes hate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It isn't because it actually exists anywhere other than in the thoughts of humans.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
The fact that we can think about our thinking gives us the chance to make believe that thinking about our thing, when I think my thinking is right, and I begin to think I am right as a result, I'm missing the fact that I'm already right. I don't need to think about it at all. If that basis is the basis, it's the nature of the fact that I can even say I, that I can speak at all, that I can breathe at all, that I can experience any of it.
Mm-hmm.
So you see the history of this, and it continues today.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we can argue about that in many different ways, which people do. But if it's a simple fact and it's been happening, it might be worth noting. And also note that we participate in it to any degree that we do those things that we make believe are real and true when in fact they're not. Because we're contributing to that consciousness. And consciousness goes way beyond the body. We have telepathic understanding. We can feel and sense people very clearly. But the preoccupation with all of the conflicted thinking gives us an impression that because we're so preoccupied paying attention to things that aren't actually happening, that the things that are happening aren't happening, right? So that's another perversion of this line of thinking.
Mm-hmm. It's like everyone is, you know how in Alice in Wonderland, she says, like, in my world, everything would be what it is, and what it isn't, what would be what it is. That's like what's going on right now.
Exactly. Well, think about the idea that things are how I think they are is that looking glass that she had. Mm-hmm. She thought if she looked through the looking glass, how she saw things was how things became. That was the whole basis of that. Now, most fairy tales and these guys that wrote those things were dealing with human dilemmas that were unresolvable. So they presented them like Jesus talked in parables. He tried to tell stories that made sense to people because he wanted to simplify something that had much greater implications than the simplicity of the story. But it allowed people who might not otherwise digest that information to start contemplating such things, because there's a natural resistance. When I'm defending who I think I am by making believe all I am is what I think, I'm naturally reactive to any other thinking. Mm-hmm. Because I'm trying to prove that I'm right. And there is no proof in right. Life's terms never fought before humans got here. It didn't collide and, try to disrupt the universe because nobody was thinking. Everything was just doing what it knew to do. It wasn't mm-hmm. stuck in this sort of human dilemma that's caused by thinking about our thinking. And thinking about our thinking is a huge contemplative advantage to innovate and to create and to manifest things that are natural, that would benefit everyone everywhere, rather than benefit the few that think they're so brilliant to create something that they can make $50 billion off of, and then find out 20 years later it hasn't been good for anyone. And that's been going on too, because the same corrupt thinking is going to lead to corrupt action. It's been that way as long as we've been thinking this way.
Yeah.
So that seems vast, given that our experience seems to be so small, but we're not separate from all that. We're absolutely intimately connected to all that. Everything, everywhere, everything, the entire universe. And
That's
not
right.
only not only the universe, but everything that might be beyond the universe. Because if the universe is expanding, there's got to be something beyond it. If it's always growing, there must be something there to grow into.
The multiverse.
Well, multiverses, think of universe as a single song.
Mhm.
That's what universe means, basically.
Oh yeah, uni, one, verse, as in.
Yeah.
That's why everything's in harmony. Get it?
Yes. Yeah. Well, because there's no disharmony, because there's no discord.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it isn't to say we can't think there is, but there again, it brings us back into the equation to say we're free to think what we want, including to think things that drive us to the point where we think the best thing we can do is kill someone else or ourselves. And even in that fact, we're not killing the self that we're trying to kill. We're killing the body that's doing the thinking about the self that doesn't exist, which is even sicker.
Yeah.
The self we're trying to kill has never even lived, except in an idea we have, which is why people refer to their ego almost as though it has some, like it's occupying their body somewhere inside there that they have to get under control because it keeps coming out of the bedroom and misbehaving. Like they try to ground it. We talk about being grounded. Think about that. We're already grounded. Gravity has been holding all of us to the earth from the beginning of existence for humans, and also all other animals and rocks and plants and whatever. So we're already grounded. We're already intact. We talk about it in terms that are disjointed because we think of the disjointed thinking as reality. It isn't.
Mm-hmm. That's why I started thinking about Alice in Wonderland, because that's a perfect metaphor.
I agree with you. I've used that often. So here's another part of that too. If the lens I'm looking through, not the lenses, but the lens, if the lens I'm looking through, I think is true, then my understanding is actually misunderstanding. So you can see the nature of a lie. The lie is trying to be what it can't be. If something's false, it's trying to be true. If it's true, it's trying to be false. The one thing it can never be is the only thing it claims to be.
Right.
So what happens? I start to say, well, that's my understanding, and you can't tell me what to do. And I don't want to hear from you anymore. And I don't like you because you simply don't think the way I think, because that understanding is misunderstanding. And I am so nervous about being found out for perpetuating this because I know better, that I end up hating anybody who gets close to me rather than thanking them for saying, oh, you're helping me actually come to terms with something that I've been struggling with and not even thinking I was struggling, thinking the struggle was everybody else and blaming them for doing what they were doing to draw my attention, rather than seeing that it was the maintenance of that thinking that was causing the whole chain reaction.
Oh, Jack, this reminds me of one of the conferences Jim Rohn had, like when he was alive. He was talking about how before he met his mentor, he used to think that it was everyone's fault except his. He would blame the government. He would blame his neighbors. He would even blame the universe. He would be, and then he was saying something. I think it was the same conference. They're really long, but they're really fun to listen to. And the way you're speaking is reminding me of him, where he was saying that it's like
Who was that?
Jim Rohn. I can put it in the chat so like you can see the spelling. Have you heard of him?
Is it a cartoon or?
No, it's a real man.
Oh, no, I didn't. I've not heard of him.
Oh, he's really funny.
Oh, you mean he's a comedian?
Well, he like does what you do. He like talks to people about life, but he adds that humor into it, so it like really sticks with you. Yeah.
Well, I may need to add a little more humor than to salt the meal, salt and pepper.
Es que nos recuerda.
Yeah, the way you're talking is reminding both of us of him.
Yes.
Oh, well, I'd like to know more about him. Maybe we can play a clip so that other people.
I was going to say that maybe we can. Yes. I could maybe find something if we have time, and if you let me share my.
If you text it, or you can put it on the screen, we can read it out loud for anybody listening to end up Googling and doing a little research on their own too.
Okay.
Yeah. Because my sense is this has been talked about for a long time.
It has.
In many, many different ways. Yeah. But the idea of the thinking issue being an addiction has not been talked about, except in within Alcoholics Anonymous, the Main point of the disease. The symptom was alcohol. The symbol was alcohol. The disease was mental.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very often thought that the mental obsession is only connected to the alcohol or the drugs or the prescription medication or the gambling or the sex or the whatever that thing is that people are doing. They think that's all. But the mental obsession will attach to anything to make believe it's that thing rather than the thinking that's causing that thing. It's almost like the mental obsession becomes a gravitational pull of what seems to matter so much that now this matter has its own gravitational pull to attract all sorts of other compulsive behaviors. And my sense is that our brains work very much like the universe does. And we talk about what matters. We talk about the gravity of the situation. Think about that, right? It must be that we think things matter, and all of a sudden we want to attract that kind of thinking because it's like ours, and we think we're more safe. We're safer. But we're actually isolating ourselves in a new way with other people who only think like we do, so that we don't threaten the potential of actually noticing the thought we're thinking is absolutely insane. So it isn't to say we can't take positions, that things can't matter, but when they do, it's what we're thinking about them that's causing them. It isn't that matter isn't out there. It's not showing up in our brain like a big boulder, and I can't get, I can't move today because I got a big boulder in my head. But that weight is depressing because we wear it emotionally, we wear it physically. It actually depresses our body's ability to provide the drugs that the body naturally, chemicals that the body naturally creates for well-being.
Right.
And well-being is being well. The nature of our existence is being. We have human bodies. If we are beings by nature, we know much more than what we think. And to begin to notice that allows our thinking to express that knowingness naturally. And that's what intuition is. Intuition is wisdom and inspiration. It's a knowing we don't even know. We don't have to know why we know it. We just know we know. Very simple, because it isn't in doubt. There's no uncertainty. The doubt and uncertainty comes from thinking, and not all thinking, but thinking that is bent on trying to prove it's right and real, rather than realize that thinking is based on right and real. We wouldn't even be able to
prove it any. So
exactly.
Why do you have to prove it in the first place?
Well, and what's ironic about that, because all of this leads back to revealing that the absolute is absolute, because the absolute isn't arguing about truth. It isn't fighting for life's terms. It just is. It is that way. So when we abide by those life terms, in the simplest way, we start recognizing much easier. We start becoming productive and functional, because the functional literacy we're creating is reading our body language accurately, so that we can start operating in relation to these things in ways that produce the results that would be natural within the underlying principles of physicality or whatever this universe is made of. So to think of that as a mystery is to think it's hard to find, when in fact, if it's already found, it's no longer a mystery. Now the mystery is, why do I keep thinking of it in ways that it's not, rather than as it is?
Right.
So when we get that point, everything starts changing.
When we get to that point,
exactly.
Well, we're always at that point, because there is no point, just like there is no.
Just like a line is like, it's a concept, like it can't just go, like, imagine if in reality lines exist and everything was just going infinite in all directions, or like,
right,
all that, but it's like, no, it's a concept.
Even in math, a point can't be made, because if it has any size, it means that it takes the place of other points. So the point of the point would be to discount the other points, which means it can't really be made. Theoretically, we can make them and use them because there are some functional aspects to it that actually work, or at least help us. But I would suspect that there is a level of math that hasn't been discovered completely. I mean, calculus was heading in the direction of the infinite, but there's probably a level that would be so seamless as to literally define everything without doubt. And pretty much all scientific endeavor always draws other issues into doubt very quickly. Once they figure this out, this little bit, all of a sudden the things they used to think about, all the things around it, start to change very quickly too. So there's always an uncovering. So if it's already uncovered and we start thinking in those terms and know we know, the chances are we're going to come to terms with life's terms quicker and be able to function on a level that would far exceed anything that we could even imagine. because our imagination has simply been trying to take scraps and crumbs and think that we're getting better, when in fact we're just barely surviving and existing. And not only that, we're threatening our existence in a big way.
Mhm.
So I guess the part of this that isn't funny is that, to the degree we make believe that there's nothing we can do, others are allowed to get worse. We contribute to the idea that there's nothing anyone else can do. And that becomes sort of a caustic experience that we're promoting, not because there's any basis to it, but because we're actually operating still on that same lack of basis.
What does caustic mean? I've never heard that word before.
I'm going to get the dictionary definition.
That seems like an important.
It's sort of corrosive, like acid would be caustic, poison would be caustic. But I like the cause part of it. So caustic is capable of destroying or eating away by chemical action. Corrosive.
How do you spell it? Is it Caustic?
Caustic. Very good. You just won the spelling bee. Now, here's what's interesting, too. Speaking of your teacher the other day, the second definition, marked by incisive sarcasm.
What? Oh my God.
Yeah. So it's caustic, it's corrosive. So that thing she thought she was doing that was funny and you were fine with, you recognized actually was burning a little bit. It was corrosive. It was disrupting your peace. You were experiencing it clearly.
Wow. Sorry, that was too good to write down. That was too good not to write down. And my mom has all the utensils.
Yeah, I love to take notes.
She has the spatula and everything for the
the stationery, I guess. I want to say utensils, but I know that's not the right word. Let's just go with stationery.
How about pencils?
Pencils, yeah. We can say pencil.
Equipment.
Equipment.
Stuff.
Things.
So stuff turns into shit when you don't want it. That's what we call it. It's stuff as long as we can use it. When it isn't, it turns into shit magically. So there again is a thinking thing.
And what's worse is that some people even think that other people are what you said.
Yeah. Well, my experience is that we're impacted by what everyone is thinking more than just what I'm thinking. But since what I'm thinking is connected to what everyone else is thinking, I've been thinking alongside everyone else the whole time, thinking somehow it was exclusive to me. So I could feel self-pity and think that I was alone in the world and a pitiful self, when in fact the idea that I'm alone at all is a pitiful thought. All I'm thinking is pitiful thinking.
Right.
So if we're all seamlessly and synchronously connected in some form or another, even forms we can't imagine, it probably wouldn't even be a form. It would just be an essence that's so essential to existence that life now becomes defined as something that isn't a life form. Forms become defined as possibilities of life, something that are possible in life. These are forms that we have that are possible, just like our thoughts are possible. They're all possible. We're able to think things that aren't true are true. That's possible because we're free.
It's what we do with thoughts that changes what's going to happen to us.
Exactly.
Well, and what's happening immediately is that if we're thinking caustically, we're going to feel caustic effects immediately. That's our body language. If we're listening honestly, like if you read the announcement, if we're listening honestly to that, we're starting to read our body language. So we have literature, we have literacy, functional literacy, meaning we know how to operate. We're operating directly in relation to the dashboard of this information that we're getting. Like a pilot, you're in your car and the oil light keeps flashing and you think, oh, the bulb's broken. And you keep driving and all of a sudden the engine's fried. We do that in our own experience and people get fried. They get depressed. They run out of energy. They break down, they have meltdowns. We use those words. Nuclear reactors melt down when they get out of balance.
Yeah.
When the chain reaction gets overwhelmed and they don't modify it sufficiently to maintain control, it'll melt the whole structure down. That's what we do. We get so out of control, and we think controlling the out of control is the goal. We just continue to perpetuate it and perpetuate it and perpetuate it until there's nothing we think we can do to stop. And that would be a pathological state, sociopathic or pathological state of mind. Not as a medical diagnosis, pure experience. But yet, they seem to identify those things exactly in those words.
Right. How would you describe someone who's pathological?
Well, I would say addiction is a pathology, meaning it's a path. It's sort of a studied path and seeming only direction. So pathological would be chronic behavior, chronic use of the wrong thinking that more of the wrong thinking will get right. That's a good definition of addiction, because most addicts don't think about what they have in terms of drugs as being enough. They're always worried about running out. That's what their concern tends to be. It's not about what they have being sufficient, because if it was, they'd say, oh, great, that's it. I don't need any more than this. But the problem in addiction is you always need more, because it's never going to be enough to satisfy the problem. And yet you're living in the delusion that somehow your thinking's going to get you there. So you keep looking for things, substances, to take place of the fact that your thinking has no substance. It has no denominator. It's just a numerator.
It's
so
like
what do we get?
Zero.
Like what?
It's like dividing by zero. You can't divide by zero.
Or multiply. Yeah. You can, but it nullifies everything. So if we're talking about insanity not existing other than in the thinking we're doing, think about a fraction with a number that's so big we don't even have words for it, like a giga. What are the biggest numbers, Gabe?
Gabe knows.
Sorry, a Googleplex?
Googleplex. Okay, so those are the biggest numbers that they're talking about now. So if you put a zero under that on a fraction, gone.
The calculator is going to be like, I don't understand what you're saying. There was an error here.
Well, no, it'll be zero.
Oh.
There's nothing there. There's nothing to begin with. It doesn't matter what you put on top of it. That's what addiction is. We're constantly trying to add more, trying to get there, constantly trying to get there. Humans have been seeking the whole time. Everybody's seeking, looking, searching. Well, what if the thing they're looking for isn't lost? What if that's been the problem? You know how they used to say X marks the spot for treasures?
Yeah.
What if the X is on the bottom of everyone's feet and everywhere they go, they're there, thinking they're not because they can't see it? They're not looking at it accurately. So what do? We have a $10 billion self-help industry that's helping a self that doesn't actually exist. It's just ideas that we're thinking about. We're trying to fix the ideas we're thinking about a self that doesn't exist so that we can be whole, rather than notice that we're whole to even be able to think about such ridiculous things. It doesn't condemn us. The thinking we have that's contemptful feels condemned.
Oh, okay. Se sienten condenados.
So if this basis is the same, we don't have to talk about it in the same way to begin to notice it and know it, and begin to concede that we have a knowing sense despite what we're thinking. And to think we have to think more about knowing it is to think, again, thinking is responsible for it, rather than we are responsible for the thinking we're doing.
And then taking action because we believed that thinking.
Well, and we're starting to actually act in accordance with what's happening, which would be more harmonic than the discord of thinking we're detached from it and now have to make up for it. That corruption at the core leads us in all other fractured decisions, in all these other directions. Good morning, Jackie.
Jackie.
Good morning. I'm
Good
driving.
morning, Jackie.
Good morning. So good to see everybody.
Thank you. You too. So if we're using thinking to solve thinking, and the thinking we're using is sick, it's going to continue to replicate sick thoughts, because the basis of our whole idea of truth is based on a lie. And it's just going to continue and continue and continue and continue and continue. Now, it isn't because it's doing it, it's because we're insisting on maintaining it. And going back to the point I made in the beginning, this isn't about not thinking. It's not about stopping obsessive thinking. It's about noticing how we started. And if we can do, what's that?
And backtracking.
Well, I would say we're not backtracking, we're present tracking. Because there's no back. There's no place that isn't present. If the present is present, we're thinking in absolute terms and realizing everything that's always happening is always happening wherever we are. So if there's any chance for correction and or the mistake is either going to be made now or corrected now. It's going to be my choice to do one or the other. Now, it doesn't mean if I make the wrong choice, I'm condemned to it. It's only when I think it's the right choice and it's wrong that I feel condemned and get lost in that chasing. It's the dog chasing his tail. You ever seen a dog chase its tail? And then when they catch the tail, they let go of it and start all over again.
Oh my gosh.
So that's the thinking that is conflicted, anguished, painful, miserable, despicable, hateful, spiteful, contemptful, and certainly not thoughtful. It's thoughtless. So again, it's not something we shouldn't do. It's simply when we do that thing, we're going to get that effect all the time. Like running into a wall, your nose is probably going to hurt. Just, it's just not going to, if you think your life is about trying to run into walls and have your nose not hurt, that's exactly what we're doing by continuing to perpetuate this and think we should get over it and feel better, when in fact we're denying the thing we're trying to get over and feel better about. We're thinking of it as real enough to get over. It isn't. There's nothing there. It's the present thought there's something there to get over that perpetuates this mythology and the superstition and the haunting effects of these fairy tales that never come true. Yay!
Thank you, Jack. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Can I share something with you, Jack?
Please.
So my life actually started. I don't know if you remember in 2022 when I had that mental breakdown.
I do.
Actually, my life started to change once I realized that my round thinking, that I always wanted to find a meaning to my round thinking, and I was just getting and by doing that, I was just corrupting my mind. I was getting darker and darker. The more I was just trying to find a meaning to that dark thought. And once I started to see the patterns, that my life started to change. It's just that my body just was tired of it. I just didn't want to be like that anymore. When I told you that I started to see things, that I started to see details, everything, that I actually started to see real colors. It was just my mind was just so addicted to thinking. But it's just that it's just hard for me to express that. I just couldn't understand it.
Yeah.
So
thankfully,
I just didn't know what to do. But it was a great experience. It's just great to be just here. Yes, I was so obsessed with thinking and trying to find a meaning to my thinking.
Well, think of the word meantime. As long as we search for the meaning, it feels very mean to exist during that period. Right? Yeah. So the word almost, it takes on a double meaning. It feels very angry and hostile and mean, and it's just an abusive state constantly. And we're the ones creating it. Nobody can affect us more than the thinking we do, because it's right where our pleasure and pain zones exist.
Right.
The scary thing, I don't know if you remember, I think I told you, what if my thinking becomes real? And you at some point told me, just to release that anxiety, just let it be.
Harry, you're breaking up a
I
little.
think you
You're
said
breaking
something
up.
like that.
You're breaking up a little. Go back, because I think you were onto something that was important to hear.
Yeah.
So you said
Yeah.
when you thought your thinking was
what
real.
about now? Yeah. Remember, I think in 2022, at some point, I thought my thinking would become real,
Right.
and that would create a lot of tension in my body. That would create a lot of anxiety.
Right.
And then you at some, because one of my biggest fears was I don't know if you remember. Well, I think I said to you, Mark, Jack, what if, because I was afraid to go crazy. What if I said to you, I'm afraid to go crazy because of my thinking. And you said to me, just act crazy for a little bit, and then that will help you release that anxiety.
What I
And
didn't hear that.
you
What?
actually said to me, what if you act like that for a little bit? That will help you release that anxiety.
Right. Kind of like
But
embrace it.
yeah, it's embrace it. And once I did that, it's just I was like, what are you doing? It's like I it's just it, it was wrong thinking.
So think about
By
where's my.
embracing it would just release that anxiety.
So here's something. I have two magnets here, right? And when the polarity of the magnet, think of bipolar that they talk about, this bipolarity in terms of the mental state. When you're doing what you're doing and thinking you shouldn't be doing what you're doing, you're creating an opposition to something that's simply a thought. So here's what happens. Look at the magnets. You see the way they bounce and they resist each other?
We can't see them. You have them off the screen. There we go. That's
okay.
A little bit like, yeah, right there. That's better.
There we go.
Okay, now watch. These are opposing.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to hold them like this. I have to maintain them. I have to fight to keep them together all the time. Because as soon as I stop, here's chronic thinking. As soon as I stop, boom, they're apart. And what are they showing me? Their nature. And what am I trying to do? Pretend it's not their nature and I got to fix it. So here's what happens when I reverse it.
Wait, go down again. Put it lower again, like where you had it before. Yeah, that's better.
So my forehead's a better screen. So watch what happens when they get close. Automatically. Boom. And now
love and hate. The first
what's interesting about magnets,
oh my gosh.
if they're aligned properly, they are attractive. And if they are not, they are repulsive. Think about the repulsiveness we have for that line of thinking. We're trying desperately to get out of it because we're so repulsed by it. And we're the ones continuing to create it by not simply conceding we're doing it. When you admitted you were doing it, Harry, because I remember this, you were outside the hospital door, if I remember.
Yeah.
When you admitted it and started to just allow it, the resistance stopped. So what happened? The maintenance stopped. The management of it stopped. It stopped because there was no more resistance. The only thing that keeps the obsessive thinking going is the thinking we're not doing it and that we shouldn't be doing it. And we wish we weren't doing it. And we wish somehow something else would save us while we're the ones subjecting us to it. So the embracing of it, just like this, as you get closer, boom, automatic. I don't have to even touch it. The magnets pull. Now what happens is this side is positive and that side's negative. And if you keep adding magnets to it, they will always maintain the totality, like the subjective and the objective. They will maintain the essence of that because the absolute is seen and seeing everything as it is, rather than some part of it as though it is separate. So when you think of subjectivity and begin to realize that it also includes objectivity, means the limit of my thoughts, objectivity starts at the limit. Everything I think is the end of everything is the beginning of everything. If everything's always changing, the absolute nature of that is that everything's always changing.
Right.
So the one thing not changing is that everything's changing. You start seeing the absolute by embracing what you're doing and noticing it's the resistance, the wishing we weren't, the hoping we weren't, the faith in trying to do something that opposes what we're doing rather than begin to concede what we're doing. That's the difference between addiction and simply having a, like I can have a thought, I'm 37 years sober off of alcohol. I can think of alcohol all day long. It doesn't lead me to think I need a drink because I don't have any thought. Mostly, I never think this is the best thing I can do. It's the only thing I can do. It's the thing I have to do. I don't think in those terms because I know exactly what will happen if I get that into my body because my body is allergic to it, just like when I eat sugar. The abnormal reaction in an allergy is to want more of the thing you should never have.
I have personal experience with that, actually. When I was younger, I loved cashews. Okay, I loved them. But I would always get a rash every time I ate them. So when we moved to Monterey and I went to an actual allergy doctor, they found out that I'm actually allergic to cashews.
Right.
and so, you know, it was kind of a bummer because back then I loved them. They were like my favorite nuts. I'd never liked peanuts, but I always loved cashews. And so it was a bummer because every time I would get a rash and I would get a fever. And so then when I found out that I'm allergic, my mom was like, oh yeah, that makes sense because when you were little, you would get a rash and you would get fever. So the solution was to stop. And I've never had that reaction again.
So depression is a mental rash.
Oh my gosh.
And you always have to scratch it.
We actually have, well, we're scratching it by trying to put out the itch, by creating it. It's like scratching poison oak. You spread it. You don't relieve it. Or scratching a mosquito bite. It gets bigger. So the allergy, an abnormal reaction, is to do the one thing that you should never do that continues to perpetuate the allergy. And it's interesting too, Esther, that we use the word love in relation to these things that are compulsive, because the allergy is basically a compulsiveness. It's asking us to do exactly what we shouldn't do.
It's
right?
like
As though it's asking, but I'm actually asking for it by eating the cashews and not noticing I get a rash. My body's telling me this isn't something, you're allergic to this. So what's the allergy of the mind? To lies, to a lack of substance being substantive. That's the allergy.
Wow.
And what is it telling me? I love that thing too much to stop. I have to continue. I'm killing my body literally by eating the thing, but I love it, so I'm going to continue. That is not love.
No.
That is a false premise for love. You are actually doing the thing we hate. Again, here's the opposition. We're doing the thing we hate because we hate the result.
That's evoling. It's not love. It's evil.
Well, it's an attempt of evolving. That's the beginning of evolve.
I was doing the same thing I did with help, and I turned it into play. So that's why it's like that.
So again, it's this choice we make to think what we're doing isn't what we're doing, first of all. And then to think the thing immediately is doing it to us. All of a sudden, my brain, think of what people say, my brain is out of control. My brain is, I have intrusive thoughts. All of a sudden, these thoughts are invaders wearing armor of a warrior, intruding on my space. They're breaking down the doors, intruding. We create a whole narrative, a whole story to go along with it. And we think because we can create that imagination, it's reality. But I've never known an actor to die when their movie ended. It's just an image. Same with theater. It's an image. But theater is attempting to take human drama and give people perspective on how we're seeing life so that we can begin to actually witness the things we're doing in ways that are more productive. That's the point of it. Shakespeare introduced the whole concept of introducing society to society by giving them things that would be funny so it would be penetrable and receivable and something people wanted to hear when he was dealing with some very, very difficult issues of the time, like the fact that the people actually counted rather than they were subjects to these monarchs who thought they were God's missionaries on earth and thought that everybody else had no value at all and they could just kill them for not behaving.
Yeah. I remember reading about that in history class.
Still happening. I read the paper this morning. So as long as the thinking's corrupt, the actions that follow will be. It's automatic. So if I think I can maintain the thinking, and this happens within sobriety in my experience, and it's largely people I work with, they think they can continue to maintain the thinking, and their job is to feel out how to feel better, or to figure out how to feel better. And in the fact, the even thought of feeling better is suggesting that we feel something worse. right? Why would we want to be feeling better if we didn't have some knowing that we were something worse? So that something worse, we're trying to feel better, that we're trying to get over.
Right. That's why, like, sometimes if someone has a bad day and then the next day it's not as bad, they're just like, I'm feeling better because, like, the first day was really rough for them.
Well, it's the same thing as thinking because other people are worse off, we're better off. And think how sick that is.
Mm-hmm.
We think, well, they have so little and they're suffering and all that. We're so lucky. How lucky are we to be in a world where we have so little influence that we can't do anything? We have no interest in doing anything for them except feel better about our circumstance. There again is this sort of isolated thinking somehow we're going to do them any good by thinking of them as so apart from us and so disconnected and so unable and so incapable that shows how weak our thinking is, not theirs, not their position, it's ours.
Wow.
It's like when someone closes their eyes and they're just like, oh, none of this is happening because I can't see it. It's like, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. Because a lot of the things that happen are actually inside of us. Like, you can't see, we can't see our thoughts like visually, but we have them. That doesn't mean they're not real.
Right. The thoughts, I would say, it's the content of the thoughts that aren't real. The decisions we make about what to think about and make believe we're creating reality, when in fact that content, there is no gap in reality that we need to create. And to concede that is a big relief for thinking and a big relief for our body, because we become, my experience is, it becomes a 24-hour-a-day meditation. We're constantly contemplating all the possibilities. We're constantly in the face of everything that's possible. Now it becomes more of a wonder and wandering rather than seeking and not finding. We're now found because we've never been lost. You can't lose reality. There's no loss in it. Morning, Jana.
It's impressive how many people in this group have J names.
It's a requirement.
No.
Jack, unfortunately, I have to go. Thank you, guys.
Harry, I'm glad to see you.
Yeah, thank you. Nice seeing you, Jack. Love you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
everything.
you for reminding me of that whole experience too. I appreciate it.
No, it's still in my mind. Thank you for everything. I really love you, Jack. Thank you. Thank you for helping me.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Adios.
You too, Harry.
Adios.
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 So something to consider, and I've been doing this more with people that I work with. Listening through, Jackie said she was listening through all of the episodes, I think, last week, right, Jackie? She's probably doing push-ups.
She said she was driving earlier.
Oh, but listening to the episodes when you're not in the middle of the episode is very different than being in the middle of the episode and trying to keep up with the conversation. Because in a way, when you can participate, it puts a little pressure on, should I, all that kind of stuff. There's an engagement. In the listening end, it's much more like we're listening to our body. Because now you're actually just listening to something that's already done. It's going to say the same thing no matter how many times you listen to it. But I'll bet if you listen to it 10 times, you're going to hear something different every time. And start to notice that your own experience changes. And if you're struggling to talk about this, Gabe and I talked about this yesterday, and I struggled for years. People used to just look at me cross-eyed and think I was out of my mind. And to the mind that was thought to be real, like, they were right. I was thinking outside of that construct. But when I started talking about it simply as my experience, I started having a different impact and experience of people, because it gave them the chance to just have their experience with it, rather than I thought I had to explain to them what their experience should be.
Right.
Which in the beginning, I think I had that. I was so insistent because I was so happy to be talking about it at all. I felt that I had to do something a little more, rather than realize that it was a lack of faith I had in them to think I needed to explain it so clearly that they didn't know it. And when I began to realize they know, if we know, they know. And so when I began operating on that basis, I started hearing people say things that were an education from my experience. Just like at dinner the other night, you said a couple of things that I said to you. I don't hear adults say that. That was incredibly clear, right?
Yeah.
So that opportunity comes from simply talking in any way about this, because in my experiences, everybody to some degree is struggling with this. Everybody I run into, I don't know people who aren't. And the ones that think they aren't, with absolute assurance, are the ones struggling more than the ones that admit it immediately. That sort of bolstered, I know, I don't do that, I don't think that way, that sort of thing is a little too insistent. Shakespeare said, "You protest too much," meaning it seems a little doubtful that this isn't having some impact on you. So it isn't my beating them down, but being with them in a way that might give them a little more room to start to admit the least. Once you can pop a balloon with a pin, but you can't pop one with a bat. So if you just give a little bit of room, people often will, they're crying in themselves if they're feeling that disconnect and that fear that has them think that admitting it would destroy everything.
Yeah.
And the conversation can open up a little bit, and it becomes a little more palatable and a little more engaging. And my sense is having other people, if they're struggling, suggest that they listen too, because now anybody can listen to this anonymously, and they do. We've had 780 cities and 77 countries listen. They can do it anonymously, and this is an anonymous conversation so that people don't have to worry about admitting anything publicly, because to admit an addiction is one thing. There's a stigma with that that's often difficult to admit. To admit insanity is a whole other thing. That's like, most people do not like to say, I am crazy, not because I do crazy things, but because I'm actually thinking crazy thoughts. I am actually insane to a degree. And I would suggest that I am insane to any degree that I maintain thoughts that I think and believe in as true that aren't true. And culturally speaking, I would say I probably have a lot of that thinking that I think is so true that I don't question, and yet it's still impinging on my ability to speak openly and honestly. It's still creating some anxiety and stress. It's still causing those problems I think I'm not feeling, because I've gotten so numb over the years to make believe that numbness is a sign of success and productivity, when in fact numbness is a sign of pain. Numbness always occurs when pain is there. It's how the body tries to save us from the pain.
Yeah.
Just like adrenaline, we release chemicals into our system that are really being reserved for actual survival and emergencies, because the body and the trauma caused by making believe our thoughts are reality causes a trauma level that sets off all the emergency signals, and we're using up and depleting those chemicals by having an emergency 24 hours a day. Most emergencies last very short periods of time, and that's what those chemicals are designed to do: give us spurts of energy. The grandmother that picks up the car because their grandchild is stuck underneath it and has that amazing strength because they think, I got to do this. They're not thinking about, can I do this? Should I think about doing this? Is there something, maybe I need to have lunch over this and go home and think? No, they're doing it. Boom, happens.
Yeah.
Right. So those chemicals are in our bodies, and those potentials and capacities are natural for us, but we're depleting that potential by constantly
Freaking
out. By constantly having this anxious background, thinking we're better than it, rather than saying, look, if I'm doing it at all, I'd rather at least admit that I'm doing it at all. So one of the things that happened to me is I began to realize that I am thinking things I don't think I'm thinking. So when I think I'm not thinking those things, I begin to say, oh no, you're thinking those things, to even think you're not thinking those things. And just start to complete the conversation a little bit, my own conversation, that thinking about my thinking. And I can also tell other people when they say, well, how do you know that? I say, well, I don't know. If I know it, I know it. And if I'm just thinking I know it, then I have some concoction of, some magic potion that I'm mixing like a witch, trying to, create some elixir that will satisfy the problem when it won't. So I can admit it in the conversation a little easier. Pretty much if anybody immediately suggests they're not doing something, you can be pretty sure they're doing it.
Yeah.
And it's to our credit that we have that capacity to do it. My sense is ultimately love gives us the freedom to destruct it. Because if it didn't, it would be condemning us only to a portion of the potential experience we're having. And we've misused it so long that we've forgotten that love is an absolute source, is generous and supportive and constant. We even term love as conditional love. There's no such thing as conditional love. That's called a contract. That's called a transaction. That's called an agreement between humans. That isn't love. That's just, if you behave this way, I will like you more than if you don't behave that way, and I will like you less. That's about like. That's not about love. Love is the nature of existence because it's always general. If you think about the way life is, no matter what we do wrong, it seems to continue to generate more potential. There's more people living on this planet today than have ever lived on this planet. Resources are being stretched. The problems we thought were not big problems are becoming more apparent. And yet the abundance is still providing for the vast majority of those people. Though there are some that are falling off the ledge as a result of the inability we have to actually provide and to give and to operate in alignment with that knowingness. Not to say we have to, but if we're doing it, might be worth mentioning it and thinking of it in those terms and beginning to open to the concept that maybe it isn't all we have to do. Maybe the idea that we have to do things and that we have things we have to do is a little redundant to begin with. Because if we already have everything and we think we don't have everything, all of a sudden we think we have to have things.
And that's where greed and like, that's where the insatiableness
exactly
comes from.
Yeah.
Like, that's what you were saying earlier about like addiction. That's basically what it is. It's like a never ending, I need this, but you're never satisfied.
Well, because the thing you're looking for isn't the problem. That's it's always something else. It's the same way with thinking that other people are causing the problem for us. We're trying to look away from what we're doing that's causing the problem by blaming and shaming and faulting others. So feeling guilty, I learned and realized, is an accurate assessment of the guilt we have for doing the thing we're doing. And it isn't a feeling. We're actually feeling the conviction of the guilt of the things we're doing. And what do we feel? Ashamed. Why are we ashamed? Because it's shameful to do this when we've been given everything and we act like we haven't. It's a shameful approach. It's possible, certainly. We're good evidence that it's possible. But it doesn't mean it's the only thing we can do.
Yeah.
Exactly. Wow.
So when you pop the balloon, all of a sudden the vastness becomes obvious because the whole structure of the balloon disappears. It doesn't just leave a little hole in it that we can see through. Boom, it's gone. And that's what this transition or this transformation of awareness is starting to see that we've always known. We just didn't think we knew. And we've been so dependent on thinking when we didn't think we know, we thought we didn't know. And I still argue. I had a discussion with a psychiatrist 2 weeks ago, and he said, no, if we're not paying attention to what's happening, we're not present. And I said, well, then where are we? Where are we? How could we not be present? We're just thinking we're not present. That's different. Again, we're thinking is reality. So we think all of a sudden we've completely voided time and space. It's not time and space wouldn't exist if that were the case. It would be gone as soon as we thought that thing and we weren't there. Where would we be? Nowhere. And you know what nowhere is broken down? Now, here. Because it's not a time-space thing. It's actual presence of that presence. In an absolute sense, it's always here with us now. To think of it as we can't do it because of a past experience and I can't get to the place I'm looking for in the future is once more thinking about what thinking can do while making believe that we're not in the present while we're doing that, thinking about things, by the way, that aren't even happening except in our own thoughts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So imagination, rather than being a great benefit to create things that are beyond what's ever been made, things that have never been made, which might seem impossible because they've never been made, but to the imaginer, it's not impossible to imagine.
Yeah.
But we've turned imagination into impossibility rather than possibility, which means we just barely seem to get a little bit of progress. We think we need an award because we took a step, and now he's incredible. He's done something phenomenal. No, come on, we barely even got out of the bassinet. or just beginning to walk upright. Facing these things honestly allows our posture to improve and our lungs to take air in and our body to function at a level that isn't constricted and it's not shrink wrapped. It's fully exposed and open and available to everything that's available, rather than the things that we think are available and wonder why we feel these blocks that limit our potential to function properly and to be flexible. I'm glad to have you in this conversation, because I know at 16 years old, there are other teenagers who are struggling, and suicide today in single digit people, as I mentioned the other day, is at an all-time high. Single digits. Imagine being so frustrated and so disabled and so depressed that you kill yourself at 9 or younger. And we are fomenting that as individuals when we aren't doing what we can. To think because others are worse off, we have nothing to do with it is a major, major flaw in thinking. We are all connected. We are on the same boat. And if the boat rises in the water, everybody rises with it. If it sinks, everybody sinks with it.
Yeah.
The impact may seem imperceptible, but if you look at what's happening in the totality of the world and start to realize that you're participating in that, it isn't imperceptible at all. It becomes very obvious. And rather than act oblivious in the name of thinking that we're not doing what we're doing, admitting that can be a little gut-wrenching and sad.
But what's worse, one moment of gut-wrenching sadness because you're admitting it, so then you can change the way you're thinking and do better, or stay in that corrosive, caustic cycle of miserableness.
Think about cancer. Cancer is a disease that functions on a lack of oxygen. That's how it grows. Now think about that. If we're constricting our body, what's happening is our body isn't getting the air it needs. It's not getting the minerals it needs. We're actually suffocating. And we think disease is normal and healing is a miracle. And you know what? Healing is normal, and disease, it's a miracle that we think disease is normal. Why? Because we're thinking backwards. We're thinking what's abnormal is normal, because we're thinking our understanding is understanding when in fact it's misunderstanding. It's all backward. Feel like a period at the end of that sentence?
Period.
Yes.
All right. So consider these things, and consideration is not making decisions. One of the things that comes with obsessive thinking is thinking we constantly have to make the right decision. Constantly trying to figure it out. We don't. Nobody is compelling us to make any decisions at all. So if you start noticing that, you'll start noticing that your observational ability to see the world around you, like Harry was talking about, the clarity of color gets different, texture gets different, the observatory capacity gets different, and you'll start noticing that you've been observing what you've been doing internally the whole time. It seems internal, but that observer that we are is not internal or external. It's just a knowing of knowing. We're witnessing it from the clarity of that knowing. And if we didn't have that clarity, we wouldn't feel disturbed. We would think disturbing was the natural order of things. And it wouldn't bother us. We wouldn't try to shake it and feel better than it. We would just live with it and say, this is the best I can do. The worse I get, the better I am. And I don't have anybody ever come to me and say that. Nobody ever says, help me think more negative thoughts and become more depressed. Can you help me? Ever. They say, I want to feel better and I want to have less negative thoughts, almost to a person. Interesting that we think we're separate, and yet we still have the exact same problem. We aren't separate. We're intimately connected. It doesn't mean we can't think. The one thing we get to do in our body is make the choices we make. We've been given a body. It's like a car. If I'm driving the car and it's filled with people, they're going to be subject to the decisions I make. And if I'm daring and dangerous as a driver, I should probably expect people in that car to be unhappy about what I'm doing. rather than think that they should think what I think while I'm putting them at risk and think that that would be okay. And that's what happens. We're all in the same car. We're all on the same planet. We're all doing this. The genetic makeup of our bodies is almost identical, regardless of color and shape and size and eye color, all that stuff. Those differences are nothing compared to the similarities.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's another day, another moment, always. And we're always in the present. We're always where we are. We always have the potential of all possibility wherever we are, all the time. To think we don't, certainly a thought. Doesn't make it true, doesn't make it real. It's just a thought. Love you guys. Thank you for being here today.
I love you, Jack. We love you,
Thanks,
Jack.
Jack.
Thanks. I don't mind love.
Oh.
My sense is that's our core. That's the thing. We don't struggle with love. We struggle with like.
Mhm.
Love is
And
the acceptance of our incorruptible innocence.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it's just the having of it.
Mhm.
It's noticing that even if we
I
don't
like
accept
that.
it, it's the same.
Oh.
Was that you, Jackie?
I like you.
Jackie!
Jackie, I love that. Well, you know what's nice about that too, Jackie?
What?
You can not like me too. You're perfectly free. And what's nice about that is to see how laughable it is when you realize that it's just a choice.
Exactly.
The idea that choices don't happen in mind, in the capital M, in the knowing self, in the knowing essence. Choices don't happen because the essence doesn't think. It already knows everything. What would there be to think about in something that's all knowing? There's nothing to think about there.
Mhm.
So if we can be free to like, we can be free to dislike, and all of a sudden it becomes ridiculous to think we can only do one or the other.
Mhm.
So what I realized about the things I thought I didn't like is that I really liked those things that I didn't like. And I was committed to them because I thought they defined me and they identified me. And all they identified were my thoughts that, by the way, were insane to think they were the only thoughts I could have. The thinking of them creating me and making me up rather than defining the thoughts I was thinking was a very difficult thing to live with, because all of a sudden, every time that thing happened, I had to prove that I didn't like it
Mhm.
and reinforce it and make everybody else's experience difficult because of something I was bothered by. And if they weren't bothered by it, I was bothered by that too. You know, it's like this cloud storm that starts, and it's hard not to get wet when the rain begins.
Exactly.
So let's continue.
Yes.
Listen. I would suggest re-listening to this during the week if you can, and just see if it doesn't strike different chords, so we can begin to engage a little more in the conversation and start to notice the potential that we have to talk gives other people a good reminder that they're capable of also getting out of that slumber, that sleepiness, that seeming dream that has them making believe that life can be a nightmare and impossible, when those are just thoughts.
Exactly.
It's impossible thoughts that we think of life as, because we're looking through that looking glass of misunderstanding. We think all of a sudden life is impossible because we don't know how to admit the thought we're creating is impossible or maintaining.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, kids.
Jack.
Aloha.
Jack, I love you, Jack.
Aloha.
We
Love you
are
guys.
free to like.
Bye, Jackie.
Bye. Thank you,
Bye,
everybody.
Jackie girl.
Bye, Shanna. I
Shanna.
miss you.
Bye. I miss you too, baby. Bye.
Bye.